Good morning, everybody. Welcome to class number 3 of our 2022 Virtual HOA Academy in partnership with the cities of Avondale, Chandler, Glendale, Goodyear, Mesa, Peoria, Phoenix, Scottsdale, Surprise, and Tempe. My name is Beth Mulcahy, and I'm the managing partner and senior attorney for the Mulcahy Law Firm in Phoenix, Arizona. I've enjoyed partnering with many of these cities that I just mentioned, and also representing HOAs and condominiums as their legal counsel for the past 25 years. My firm currently represents over 1,000 planned communities and condominium associations throughout the state of Arizona. And I also serve on my HOA board and have for many years. So what's on our agenda for today? In today's class, we're going to be discussing everything you need to know about how to run legal and effective board meetings and your annual meeting. I'll be teaching you proper planning, agenda preparation, how to conduct a regular board meeting in an hour or less, how to have a successful annual meeting so that your owners feel really comfortable with how things are running at your association. I'm also going to cover the Arizona Open Meeting Law, which is probably one of the most important pieces of legislation that association boards need to follow. Using virtual meetings, which is our new normal since the COVID-19 pandemic. Executive sessions, when you can go into executive sessions, what you can discuss, online voting, which is kind of a new trend that we're starting to see take hold throughout Arizona, use of email to make decisions, minute taking, and how to have efficient and quick regular board meetings. I'm also going to show you how to shine at the annual meeting and how to really present to your homeowners a good 360 picture of what's going on in your association, good things and bad things. And then last, how do you get volunteers to run for the board? Some of you may be board members here wondering, is this a life sentence for me to serve on the board? So I'm going to give you some tips on how to have a succession plan so that you can have others that will also begin to serve on the board. After you've served your time, you'll be able to pass the torch to them and they'll be ready to run your association. Okay, let's get started on our topics for today. First things first, I do like to know who's joining us here today. With almost 90 people here today, we have a really great representation. And for those of you who are joining us on Zoom, I'm going to be sharing a poll on your screen. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, please share your response in the comment section. So first question, in which city do you reside? And so we have all the different cities listed on the poll, which is on your screen right now. And then we have a second question to let us know what your current role is. Are you a board member? Are you a community manager? Are you an interested homeowner? Or are you other? And these poll questions are helpful because it will help us tailor the class here today to show the best representation. Okay, as you can see from the results, we have 8% from Chandler, 3% from Glendale, 6% from Goodyear, 11% from Mesa, 2% from Peoria, 23% from Phoenix, 42% from Scottsdale, 3% from Surprise, and 2% from Tempe. So almost every city had great representation here today. We have a second poll now as well. Okay, so our representation today is 62% of you are board members, 10% are community managers, 25% are interested homeowners, and 3% are other. Bottom line is that we have a lot of representation from around the valley here today, which is awesome. Thank you for being here. And we have a large cluster of board members, community managers, and a small group of interested homeowners that are here today wanting to learn more about how to run board meetings and run annual meetings. So let's get right into our topics for today. The Arizona Legislature, I always like to start the class and talk about kind of some hot topics. So today's class, we're going to be talking about what's going on in the legislature. As you probably know, the legislative session started in early January. There are a ton of bills that have been introduced, over 800 in the House and over 700 in the Senate. We're currently watching 24 HOA bills, condo bills. And each week while the legislature is in session, we are posting on our website a summary of all the pending legislation. Now, remember, these bills have not become law. These are the bills that are being discussed and voted on this year in the Arizona legislature. And the process to have bills, pass is the House and the Senate both have to pass the bills, the same form of the bill. And then it goes to the governor to sign. So as of right now, none of these bills have passed. It's still kind of early in the legislative session. Some comments from being in the trenches of, watching legislation for the past 25 years. I can give you some just general observations. The first observation I have is that this is going to be a large legislative year for HOAs and condominiums. We're coming off of 2 COVID years of the legislature where there was virtually no new legislation passed of any substance pertaining to HOAs and condos. I can't think of one time in 25 years where we've had 24 bills we're monitoring. So I think the number alone speaks volumes. Just a quick summary of the bills. I don't want to go in depth on any of them because it doesn't make sense until they pass and become the law. But here are the trends that we're seeing on the bills that have been introduced this year. There's a number of different categories that we've categorized them in. So we're seeing bills on more permitted flags. So allowing first responder flags is a good example. So bills that would prohibit associations from prohibiting certain types of additional flags or something, also another flag on the armed services. Green bills. So we always see green bills where there's a normal legislative year, but this year we're seeing bills regarding artificial grass and associations not being able to prohibit that. And also solar and water conservation, which kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of the upcoming water restrictions that are going to be coming into play in Arizona in the next 5 years. Of course, we're seeing a ton of bills on vacation and short-term rentals, how to regulate those short-term rentals so that the neighbors have peace and so that the short-term renters are held accountable for their actions and the landlords are held accountable for their actions. So we've done many bills on that, I think over 5. Amending association documents, creating a uniform percentage to amend documents is another thing that's being proposed. There's some other bills that talk about like political signs and peaceful assembly within an association. So being able to have members peacefully assemble within your association to discuss association or other issues. And last, there's some kind of scary bills taking away our ability to some of our rights with regard to leaning properties and taking away the homestead exemption, elimination. Or so how it works right now is that when we're foreclosing a lien, an assessment lien, the homestead exemption does not apply to the association's assessment lien. And basically what one of these really damaging bills says is that going forward, the HOA lien would be subject to the homestead exemption. And what that means is it would make it more difficult for associations to foreclose because owners would have protections in place whereby we couldn't foreclose. It wouldn't make sense to foreclose based upon the fact that they would elect the homestead exemption on the property that they're residing in. So, we're watching these bills very carefully. I anticipate that the legislature is going to have a long legislative session this year, and it likely will go into June. And so we'll continue to monitor it, like I said. If you want the most recent update on what's going on in the legislature, all you need to do is go to our webpage at mulcahylawfirm.com. And we have a summary, like I said, every week of what's happening with each bill, a summary of the bills. And at the end of the legislative session, once the legislature closes for the year and the governor's time period to sign all bills passes, then we will put out a final legislative update cheat sheet like we always do. Okay, and I know that our office just shared with those of you who are on Zoom and Facebook Live with us our current legislative summary update for this week. Okay, another hot topic is this condo questionnaire that's been put out by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Since the Champlain Towers collapse in Surfside, Florida, we have seen a lot of press coverage, and we've seen different legislatures putting in place legislative mandates to ensure that buildings are, constructed properly and that they are maintained properly. But one thing that we didn't kind of anticipate was that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were going to come in and they were going to put out a questionnaire And this questionnaire actually just came out in January of 2022. And so we're hearing feedback from our condo associations that when they receive a request for the property being sold in a condominium, and there's a request for a disclosure statement to the association's board or to the management company, if the Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae is involved in the transaction, like they're involved in the loan, they're asking that this condo questionnaire be filled out by the boards or the management companies. And again, this new policy just went into effect January 1st, 2022. So your association may have seen this if you're a condo, or maybe you will see it in the future. So I just want to give you a little warning on it. So the condo questionnaire asks a lot of questions about how the condominium is being maintained and the structural integrity of the building. And I know that CAI, Community Associations Institute, which is a national think tank that provides free education to associations, has asked Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to, not proceed forward with this questionnaire because it contains a lot of open-ended information that could create liability for associations. Our firm also is taking the position that, associations should carefully consider whether or not they want to fill out this form. Because if you're certifying that there are no structural deficiencies in the building, now the liability is being shifted to the association's board or to the management company. And remember that the only thing that we're required under Arizona law to fill out and return to a buyer is a disclosure statement. And that's by Arizona law, and that gives information regarding associations. And that's all set out by statute. And I just shared those with you on the screen on Zoom and Facebook Live if you want to do more of a deep dive. So really, you're going to have to make a decision if you're a condominium, whether or not you're going to fill out this form. If you need our assistance navigating this, please be sure to reach out to our firm, and we can give you individual advice based upon the needs of your association. But it's kind of a danger zone, I think, because the questions are very open-ended, and I don't think that the board can certify with absolute certainty without, a structural engineer's report that your condominium doesn't have any deficiencies. So be really careful on that as you're looking at those forms if they're presented to your association. Okay, let's talk about our main topics for today: regular board meetings and annual meetings. So we have some great cheat sheets on our firm's website on both of these topics that I'd just like to bring to your attention. We have over 65 cheat sheets on a variety of topics that pertain to serving on your board, following Arizona law regarding condominiums and homeowners associations, tips on how to have a successful association. And two of those cheat sheets that we have on our website at mulcahylawfirm.com are one that talks about community association board meetings, which we are sharing with you, and then another one called How to Conduct Successful Annual Meetings. And both of those are going to be more of a deep dive. So if you want to take a look at those after this presentation, it has some valuable information that can help you have a successful, efficient regular board meeting and also a successful annual meeting, so that the one time of the year that you're meeting to give a 360 view of your association at your annual meeting, you make it a really successful and productive meeting that provides assurances to your owners that you're doing a great job running the association. Okay, let's first talk a little bit about the regular board meeting. So most of our boards are meeting monthly or quarterly, with a few months off, maybe at the December holidays or summertime when it might be difficult to get a quorum. Boards may not be meeting, but for the most part, most boards are meeting almost every month. And that's going to be your regular board meeting for your association. So one of the biggest problems that we see with board meetings is that they just take forever, number one, and you don't accomplish anything. You just kind of go round and round in a circle. And, that really does provide frustration to the board members who are serving and also to the homeowners who may be attending to listen on a certain topic, et cetera. So what I'm going to try to do today is give you a blueprint for how to have a successful regular board meeting, how to comply with the law, how to be efficient with your time so that you can try to have a 1-hour board meeting. So the first thing I want to mention is that to have a successful regular board meeting, you really have to have proper planning. There's planning on the front end of the meeting so that the actual meeting runs really efficiently. And that's necessary if you want to have, a really business-like, short, regular board meeting. You have to plan ahead. And so here's some things that we suggest you do to plan ahead. So number one, your board should have a board packet for all board members. Typically, the manager creates the board packet and distributes it to the board several days in advance of the meeting. If you're self-managed, then maybe the president or the treasurer of the association or the secretary handles putting out information in the form of a board packet. And typically what the board packet will contain is minutes from last month's board meeting or your previous board meeting. Financial information about your association, such as maybe copies of your bank statement, copies of your balance sheet, and your financial statements for the association, delinquency list of owners who may be delinquent in payment of assessments, status report from an attorney who may be handling some of your files for delinquent owners or other litigation for your association. Committee information. So if you have any special committees that have been put in place, maybe they have a report or maybe they have some bids for the board. The management company's report or the manager's report, the treasurer's report, maybe the president's going to have some comments and they have a report in there. Any important association correspondence or bids that you may be voting on at that meeting. And most importantly, the meeting agenda. All of this information should be provided in the board packet for all board members. And the packet should be arranged in the same chronological order as the meeting agenda. So of course, you look at the board packet, you should have the agenda right on top, and then have the paperwork that mirrors the agenda, directly following the agenda in the packet. And, it should be in the same order as it is listed on the agenda. It's good to label items if you're getting an actual paper copy of the agenda and place them in the agenda section in which they'll be addressed. Sometimes boards even use colored paper to distinguish the different sections on in the board packet to match the agenda. Okay, about 10 days before the board meeting, typically the board president and the manager will start working on the agenda for the board meeting. And this is all part of your prep process to get ready for the board meeting. A properly planned agenda will provide organization and will shorten the length of the meetings. Remember, the agenda is the backbone of the board packet and should have enough detail to help board members prepare for the meeting. So the typical agenda items that we see are going to be like the name of the association. It's going to be at the top of the agenda. The type of meeting it is, if it's a regular board meeting or the March 2022 board meeting for ABC Association. The date, the start time. The first thing typically that you do is establish a quorum at a regular board meeting. Then you approve the next month's meeting minutes. Then you have your officer reports. Then you have your committee reports. Then maybe you have your manager's reports, and you can kind of play around with how this is structured on your agenda. If you want the manager to go first or whatever, you can do that too. And then you're going to maybe have old business, new business on the agenda. Some suggestions for you on the agenda. Put benchmark times on the agenda. Now, this is going to be tip number one on how to make sure that your board has a 1 hour board meeting. So, for example, on your agenda, you should say the meeting is promptly starting, let's give an example, at 8:15 a.m. And there'll be establishment of a quorum at 8:15. From 8:17 to 8:20, we will be reviewing last month's meeting minutes, and that'll be just listed right on the agenda in parentheses. From 8:20 to 8:30, we'll have the manager's report. From 8:30 to 8:40, we'll have the treasurer's report. From 8:40 to 8:50, we'll have, new business, and just set it up with, what you think the time period is needed for each subject. Also, some associations start the meeting with a homeowner forum where the first 10 minutes of the meeting are the time for homeowners to come to the meeting and ask questions or make a statement. So that's also something that you can put on your timed agenda. Most associations do that, right at the beginning of the meeting, maybe even before the meeting starts. They'll have a homeowner forum for 10 minutes. And you can place time limitations on how long those owners speak during the homeowner forum so that the owners, don't go on and make your meeting longer than it needs to be. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, we're going to go into this in more detail, but typically your agenda will also have on the agenda a notation about going into executive session. Most boards do go into executive session at the end of the regular open board meeting. And so under Arizona law, you are required to list the topics that you will be discussing during executive session. And we're going to be talking about that in just a minute, but I didn't want to leave the topic of the agenda without saying that the agenda should also have a portion of the agenda indicating that the board will be going into executive session, the time they'll be going into executive session, and the topics they will be discussing consistent with Arizona law for executive session meetings. And just, you are required under Arizona law to indicate on your notice of meeting for your annual meeting, for your executive session meeting, the topics that you'll be discussing during the executive session meeting. And again, we're going to talk a little bit more detail on that in a minute. Okay, so some of you may be familiar with the notice requirements for having a regular board meeting or an executive session board meeting. So what type of notice do you have to have for these regular or executive session board meetings? So under Arizona law, regardless of what your documents may state, notice must be given to your members of any regular board meeting, of any regularly scheduled committee meeting, or any executive session meeting of your board at least 48 hours in advance of that meeting. And you can do that by putting out an agenda that has, the information regarding your upcoming board meeting or your upcoming committee meeting or your upcoming executive session meeting. You just need to have the date, time, and location of the meeting on that, whatever form that you put it out in. It could be an agenda, it could be a newsletter, you could do sandwich boards at the entrances of the community. Just remember, it needs to be done 48 hours in advance of the meeting. Our firm, of course, suggests that you provide a detailed agenda with the notice of meeting, or you make the detailed agenda the notice of meeting to comply with the requirements of providing notice of the meeting 48 hours in advance of the meeting. If you have an emergency where your board can't wait 48 hours to provide notice to the membership, there's a special exception under Arizona law that allows the board to have what we call an emergency board meeting. And if that happens, the 48 hours notice is suspended, and you don't have to give it. It's not required under the law. You do have to take minutes at that emergency board meeting. And at the next regularly scheduled board meeting for your association, you have to read into the record that you had an emergency meeting and what was decided, and have those minutes attached to the next regular board meeting that you have. So there's a good paper trail as to why you went into have an emergency board meeting and what was decided in that emergency board meeting. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some other aspects of, running your meeting. So another really important tip is having your board meeting in a business environment. So, some different examples of places that are a good place to have your regular board meeting would be at your clubhouse, at your association's pool, management company conference room, a rented room at a school or a church. Select a location that is going to be quiet so that your board can conduct business, have enough room for residents and the board to be in the same room, discussing things, make it comfortable for everybody so they have a chair. You don't want to have it be, like sardines in a can where there's not enough room and, the people are packing into the room and it's uncomfortable. Prohibit smoking, alcohol at board meetings. Both of those things would not be, conducive to a board meeting. You should have an agenda available for your residents if they are attending the meeting in person. If you're doing and that's the requirement of the law, just so you know, if you're doing virtual meetings, a lot of our clients are still doing virtual meetings for efficiencies and because they just prefer doing virtual meetings now that they became accustomed to doing it while the pandemic has been ongoing. If you're doing a virtual meeting, just remember you need to either share the agenda as a screen share on your Zoom call or your whatever virtual platform that you're using so that if owners want to follow along, they have a copy of the agenda. You also can, comply with that by sending out the agenda by email to all the owners or posting it on the common areas too. But you do have to provide an agenda to all of your owners. One more thing about the notice. So if you're having a virtual meeting, important to remember that when you're putting out your notice, your 48 hours notice of the meeting, we recommend that you have the Zoom link or the login information on that notice so that it makes it easy for owners to find it if they want to log in for the regular board meeting. And a lot of associations have that login information also on their website. So if owners, are trying to log in the day of the meeting, they just go to the website, they can click the link, and it's really easy for them to attend the regular board meeting. I'd like some feedback from you right now. It's always helpful to hear what's going on in your association, and it's hard when we're teaching these classes virtually to connect with you and to make sure that I'm understanding what's going on in your association. So we have a poll question for you. The question is, how are your board meetings currently being held? Are you having in-person? Are you having your meetings virtually? Are you doing a hybrid of in-person and virtually? Or are you not meeting at all? Okay, great feedback. So we're having 38% are virtual, 38% are in person, 37% are virtual, 22% are hybrid, and 2% are not meeting at all. A couple thoughts. So it's really, the numbers are starting to show that people are really adapting to having the virtual board meetings. And as you can see, we're almost hand in hand. If it's just in person or virtual, it's, 38, 37%. And the hybrid, which, gives people an opportunity to appear virtually and in person, really puts it over the top, because you can see that there was a really large percentage of associations that have adapted to allowing owners to appear virtually. And I really do think this is going to be something that will stay with us in the future, just because it makes it easy for board members and homeowners to attend, whether they live in state or out of state. And there are some efficiencies, and in some cases, there's better control over the meetings if you have difficult or disgruntled owners that, come in and hijack your meetings. So great information, great feedback. That's kind of what we have been anticipating. I know our firm is mainly attending right now. Sorry, we just had a little technical difficulty there. Our firm is mainly attending meetings virtually as well right now, mostly because associations have recognized that they don't want to pay for the lawyer's travel time to come to their meeting. And it's just efficient and smarter just to put us right on the screen and appear virtually at your board meetings. Okay, let's go on and give you some additional tips on how you can, comply with the open meeting law. So remember, Arizona has its own open meeting law just for condominiums and planned communities. And it's different than the open meeting law that applies to school boards and city councils. And basically, the bottom line on the meetings are that anytime a quorum of the board is meeting to discuss association business, or anytime you have a regularly scheduled committee meeting, we need to comply with the Arizona open meeting law. And basically what that law says is that anytime there's a quorum of the board or a quorum of a regularly scheduled committee meeting, that meeting is required to be open to all association members or their designated representatives. And members or their designated representatives are allowed to attend and speak at appropriate times during the deliberations of the meeting. And so, the bottom line is that owners have a right to, have notice of the meeting. We already talked about that, 48 hours in advance. Anytime there's a quorum of the board meeting to discuss association business, or anytime we have a situation where, we're having some technical difficulties. Okay, everybody, we had a little technical difficulty, but I have a great team and they've already converted me to a different computer. So sorry about that. Okay, so we're talking about the open meeting law, and some points on the open meeting law would be, remember we talked about the 48 hours notice. We talked about the fact that owners should be allowed to attend, listen, and participate anytime we have a quorum of the board meeting to discuss association business, or anytime we have a regularly scheduled committee meeting. Something that can sometimes be problematic is knowing when to allow owners to speak during a regularly scheduled board meeting. So one suggestion on this is we talked about already about having a homeowner forum at the beginning of the board meeting. Setting aside 10 minutes and letting owners to talk. That's one way that you can comply with this. Another way that you can comply with this would be to, before the board takes formal action on something, the board is required to allow owners to contribute if they choose or if they want to contribute. So how most boards handle this is that they will just start the meeting after the homeowner forum, and they'll just start, conducting their business. And before the board takes a vote on something, so typically there's a motion, a second, and then there's a discussion before the board votes on something. If an owner pipes up and says, hey, I want to contribute, the board, will let that owner contribute or should let that owner contribute to be in compliance with the Arizona open meeting law. So just so that you're aware of that, there are, that is a requirement that if an owner wants to speak before the board takes formal action on something, we are required to do that. Let's switch gears and talk a little bit now about executive sessions. We already talked about the fact that you have to notice executive session meetings 48 hours in advance of the meeting, even though owners aren't allowed to attend the executive session unless the board invites them to attend. So the executive session is typically the time that the board is meeting together alone without the owners there. But you still have to give notice of the executive session so that owners know that you're meeting, discussing executive session topics. You have to stay within the, allowable executive session topics under Arizona law. And the notice that you put out there has to indicate which topics you're going to be discussing during executive session under that law. And so what are the different categories that you can go into executive session for? Number one, legal advice from an attorney for the board or the association. So if I've given you an opinion letter, if I've sent an email to a board member or a manager regarding a legal opinion on any topic or just advice on any topic, you can go into executive session to talk about that. You can go into executive session to talk about any litigation that you're thinking about filing or any litigation that you're currently involved in for your association. Those are, another topic that you can go into executive session to talk about. We don't really see this one very often, but I'm mentioning it because it's part of the law. So anytime you're discussing personal health or financial information about a member of the association, independent contractor of the association, or an employee of the association. The next category is anytime you're discussing job performance of, compensation of, health records of, or specific complaints against an individual employee of the association or an independent contractor of the association. And then the final executive session topic is discussion of an owner's appeal for any fine or citation that they may receive. Those are the most common topics that we see. So as a rule of thumb, boards are typically only going into executive session to talk about legal advice from an attorney, any litigation you may be thinking about filing, or any litigation that you may be involved in, and basically performance and compensation of your vendors. Those are the most common topics that we are seeing. Moving forward, some things to avoid in executive session would be getting off course. So anytime you're moving back into topics that should be discussed during the open session, that's a big no-no. So don't do that. Also, hiring and firing of vendors, discussions regarding your budget. These are all things that need to be done in the open session. So be really careful. Stay in the right lane when you're having your board meetings. Open board meetings versus closed board meetings or executive session meetings, there's a big distinction. And once you go into executive session, you should only really be talking about the most common executive session topics, which are, again, advice from your attorney, pending or contemplated litigation, and typically job performance and compensation of your vendors or your employees. Okay, let's switch over and talk a little bit about informal board meetings. I get this question all the time, so I'm going to answer it. So what if your board is walking the neighborhood to go look at a violation or an architectural issue, and it's a quorum of the board and you're discussing association business? Is that an open board meeting? Yes, it is. So quorum of the board discussing association business, you need to notice that meeting 48 hours in advance. Now, is that practical? Probably not. What we recommend that you do is have less than a quorum, go look at something together, so then it's not an official board meeting, or maybe have the board members individually go and look at a violation or whatever, you might be doing. Those are some tips to, work around that particular issue. Some other comments would be, some suggestions for, just regular board meetings and actually executive sessions is don't forget to use parliamentary procedure as you're conducting these meetings. Some boards say, oh, we have to follow Robert's Rules of Order. I mean, Robert's Rules of Order is very complex, large series of, rules that associations would have to follow if they adopt Robert's Rules of Order. We don't suggest that. We suggest that if your bylaws don't require you to follow Robert's Rules of Order, that you just take the parliamentary procedure, the best tips from that, and utilize them as you're operating in your board meetings. So stick to the agenda is a rule of parliamentary procedure. So don't go veering off into other topics that are going to make the meeting longer. Discuss one subject at a time. Give each board member an opportunity to speak if they want to before a board member would be able to speak a second time on an issue. Speak only about the topic being discussed. Don't be going off on some other topic. Speak only when recognized by the chair. The board president or the chair is running the meeting. And so if things start getting out of control with homeowner comments or board member comments, the chair really needs to get the meeting back under control and state who has the floor and who can be discussing a topic. And then, of course, most basic rule of parliamentary procedure is decide things by motions, seconds, and votes. Okay, my final tips on how to keep your meeting moving. Adhere to the agenda, right? Look at those benchmark times and stick to them. Board members should arrive on time and be prepared, have already reviewed the board packet before the meeting. Even if you only spend 5 to 7 minutes looking at it, that is being prepared for the meeting so that you are familiar with what's going to be discussed and you are ready to come in and make decisions for your community. The board president, a tip to keep the meeting moving, you are the team captain. You are the person, the bottom line is with you, that the buck stops with you, that if the meetings are running over an hour, it's unfortunately your fault. You are in charge of keeping these meetings running efficiently, staying on top of being on track of the agenda, and sticking to the benchmark times that we talked about earlier in this presentation. So, and a good way to, if you have a problem, like sometimes, I mentioned I serve on my board, sometimes we get stuck on a topic on our agenda and, we're dangerously close to going over the 10 minutes that we allocated on the topic. And frankly, it's not going anywhere. Like we're at basically we can't agree as a board how we want to move forward. That's the time that the president should say, okay, let's table this issue and let's put this on next month's agenda. We can't come to any final conclusions today. Think about it over the next month, come back, and we'll talk about this issue again and hopefully be able to move forward on this issue. Keep the discussion focused on association business. And this is where the president really does need to step in. If people start veering off to a totally, left field topic that's not on the agenda, the president needs to gently go back to the board and say, we're off topic. We need to stay on topic. If we have time at the end, we can talk about that issue. Another great topic for, keeping the meeting moving and accomplishing things at board meetings is your manager or whoever brings an issue to the board should present the issue with a solution or solutions. Okay, so let's say that you have an issue where, there's a tree roots that are causing damage to a wall. and the owner's contacting the association regarding the damage to the wall. They're claiming it's the association's common area tree that's causing the damage. When that issue is presented on the agenda for your association's board meeting, there should be different things that we can do. Number one, have we sent somebody out there to an expert to look at the tree to determine should the tree be removed? Can the tree roots be cut back? Is the tree actually causing damage to the wall, as the owner's saying? And so we've got the issue, and then we have different, suggestions or solutions on how to handle this from somebody that's, is qualified to provide that information. Maybe if it's going to be a large expenditure that you have to spend to come up with the solution, then when the issue is presented, the manager or whoever is doing the agenda says, I recommend that we hire, a structural engineer or whoever we need for this particular purpose, and then give us a couple different names and bids by them to come out and look at the property so that we're actually getting things done at the meeting. And it's not just like, we discuss the tree root issue for 4 months before we get somebody out to look at it. Be proactive and think ahead so that the board can come to the meeting and vote. Let's talk a little bit now about the use of email to, basically violate the open meeting law. So be really careful on this. The legislature has spoken. They feel that in Arizona, if a quorum of the board is meeting to discuss association business, that your board should be conducting an open board meeting and giving 48 hours notice to the membership and allowing the members to attend in person or virtually, depending on how your association is running your meetings now. You want to be really careful about making decisions of your board via email. There might be some exceptions in truly emergency circumstances where we can't wait the 48 hours and we have to make a decision by email, but those are very few and far between. Also, be really careful about management companies and boards that are promoting using unanimous consent by email to make decisions of the board. It's our firm's opinion that this is contrary to the Arizona open meeting law. In fact, there have been 2 administrative law cases decided in the past 5 years that indicate that this violates the Arizona open meeting law. So be really careful on that. I know it's easier to do it that way, but you are going to get yourself into trouble. If you have made decisions like that, in between meetings by email or by unanimous written consent, at the very next open board meeting, make sure you reaffirm that decision in an open board meeting so that there's a paper trail that was decided at an open board meeting. But again, our firm is opposed to using unanimous consent forms in lieu of having an open board meeting because we think it violates the law. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, meeting minutes. We have on our cheat sheet, we talk about how to have perfectly proper meeting minutes. Our board members cheat sheet, I encourage you to take a look at that because it gives valuable information on what should be in the minutes, how long they should be. The bottom line is meeting minutes really should only be 1 page, and they reflect who was present in terms of the decision makers, the board members, and what was decided by the board. So the votes are the most important things that the meeting minutes should document. And I'd encourage you to take a look at our cheat sheet for a more deep dive on how to take perfectly proper meeting minutes. Also, if you have conflict in your board meetings, maybe it's conflict with a difficult owner that comes, or maybe conflict between your board members. Our cheat sheet on board meetings also has some great tips on how to handle that conflict as it comes up at your board meetings. And we're going to be teaching a class here, I think, next month on how to deal with difficult people. So we'll be addressing that issue more next month. But if you've got a hot topic right now in your association, you're dealing with it, check out our cheat sheet on board meetings because we talk about how to deal with conflict significantly on those board meetings. Okay, let's talk a little bit about annual meetings now. So how can a board shine at an annual meeting? So your annual meeting is going to be your once a year meeting of your entire community. You're required to have an annual meeting under Arizona law. And it's really your time to present to the owners the state of your association, good and bad, challenges you've had, accomplishments you've had, goals for the next year. It's typically your highest attendance meeting. You really do have to do planning for your annual meeting well in advance of your annual meeting. So, for example, if your annual meeting is in June, it's March, you should be doing planning right now. And some of the planning that you need to do would be to secure the location that you're going to have the annual meeting. If you're going to have it in a virtual platform, that's fine. Just making sure that you're getting that virtual platform set up. Finding candidates to run for the open positions on the board. You'll want to check your bylaws to see, what type of requirements your bylaws may have a nominating committee, or, you may not have that. Maybe your community sends out a letter to the membership asking for volunteers to serve on the board. You need to really back that out a few months in advance, because we need those names to put on the notice of annual meeting and the ballots, the absentee ballots to be used at the annual meeting. Sometimes it's hard to get board members, right? We send out the notice asking, hey, anybody interested in running for the board, and no one gives us their name. So, some things that you could do would be to ask for volunteers, send out a letter, like I said, pinpoint people in the community who you think might be good board members, call them, ask them if they'll volunteer to help. If you don't get any volunteers to serve on the board, you may need to get your attorney involved and have your attorney send a letter to the association explaining that, hey, if we don't have board members to run our community may have to go into a receivership, and that's going to cost a lot more money in the form of increased assessment amounts to pay for the receiver to run the association. And so those are just some suggestions on, how to get people to run for the board. Okay, annual meeting, same kind of game plan for the annual meeting that you would have for a regular board meeting. You want to, like I said, be prepared in advance, have a timeline that you create for your annual meeting. And the timeline should indicate, when you're going to request candidates to run for the board. So send out a letter asking for people to volunteer on the board. The timeline should also include when the notice of meeting should be given for the annual meeting. And remember, under Arizona law, you have to give notice not less than 10, not more than 50 days in advance of the annual meeting. And that's despite what your documents may say. You got to follow what Arizona law says. So you want to have that all calendared there. Then the notice of annual meeting and the meeting packet that you send to the owners, lots of times you're putting the agenda in there. You're putting the absentee ballot, of course, the notice of annual meeting. You may also want to include last year's annual meeting minutes, because owners are going to be asked to vote on that on the absentee ballot. And so you want to make sure that if they're voting on it, that they have a copy of it so that they can review it. And so all that information is going to go out prior to the annual meeting. And then, closer to the annual meeting, you'll want to confirm, if you're having it in person, that the venue is, that you've confirmed that you've reserved the venue. You'll want to have the board have a little pre-meeting. It may need to be an open meeting if you have a majority of the board there, where you plan out how you're going to run the annual meeting. A lot of boards use a PowerPoint presentation and have handouts for the owners that they will either share on the screen if it's a virtual meeting, or that they will give in person. And just really what the board should be thinking is, our presentation should be an orderly discussion of, our financials in the association. What is our current financial status and state? You should talk about the budget and year-to-date budget, how we come up with the assessment amount, why we need that amount, what our expenses are. You should be talking about how certain things are getting more expensive. For associations, overseating is one thing that comes to mind right away. Getting supplies for many associations is significantly more expensive. Talking about the challenges that are facing your association, whether it's difficult owners or, coming up with a long-term plan for your community for, maintenance of your amenities. Whatever the issues are that are facing your association. Maybe you don't have enough money and you need to have an orderly presentation as to why we need to have a special assessment. Or maybe you're converting turf to desert landscaping. You may want to bring in an expert to come in and show pictures on the screen as to, this is how it will look if we do a turf conversion to desert landscaping. So The key thing to remember if you're running the annual meeting as a board is make it an orderly presentation. Provide value to the owners. Let them know, what the current state of the association is. Let them know what your goals are. And show them that you are running this in a business-like manner so that they have a high comfort level of how the board is operating and running. And those really are, my best tips. Same thing for the annual meeting as with a regular board meeting. You typically will have a time for the homeowners to give input. Typically, the annual meeting runs in the following way. Like you'll have, your meeting will open. You'll establish a quorum of members present. That quorum will be established by looking at the members that are attending in person or virtually, and then the members that have returned an absentee or mail-in ballot. And prior to the meeting starting, you should know what your quorum is by looking at your bylaws, and you should be walking into the meeting, frankly, with the quorum already. Know that you already have the quorum. If you're a little short on getting the quorum, a week or two before the meeting, you should be tracking. Okay, how many ballots have we received? Are we close to the quorum? If you aren't, continue to send out reminders to your owners saying, hey, our annual meeting is on X date. We really need you to either attend in person or virtually, or to return the absentee or mail-in ballot so that we can actually conduct the meeting, the annual meeting. So when you get into the meeting, you're going to establish the quorum. Like I said, you're going to approve last year's meeting minutes, and just kind of a practice pointer on that. The board doesn't vote on that. The owners at the meeting vote on it. So you'll look at all of the absentee and mail-in ballots. Typically, it's very rare that anyone votes no to approve last year's meeting minutes. And then for, those ballots will be counted, and it'll be determined whether or not those meeting minutes from last year's annual meeting will pass. And so typically how it works at the meeting is that somebody from the audience makes a motion. The board president will call for a motion from the audience, a second, and then all those in favor of approving last month's meeting minutes, and everybody typically says aye. If there's some sort of dissent on it, then you'll want to go and check the actual absentee and mail-in ballots and make sure that we have a majority of the votes approving it, which, like I said, in 25 years, I've never seen the annual meeting minutes from the prior year not pass. So then you'll get into the financials. So the treasurer will typically get up and talk about, how much money the association has. Maybe sometimes they use a pie chart and they put a graphics up there of how the association's money is spent. I think you'll be surprised to see that a great majority of the money is spent on the management company and on landscaping for each association. And then maybe talk about the year-to-date budget and any large financial, considerations for that particular year. The manager will typically get up and give a manager's report on behalf of the management managing the association. The president may get up and give a president's report. Usually we close the voting of the ballots at this point. Maybe you close it right when the meeting starts, and any ballots that have either come in may have already been counted the day of the annual meeting, the ones that came in absentee ballot by mail or fax or email. And those ballots have already been counted before the annual meeting if you have a large volume, or maybe you're counting them that live at the meeting. And then anybody who, hands in a ballot at the meeting in person, you just add that to the tally. Typically the inspectors of elections, so you'll typically have 2 volunteers from the audience who are counting the ballot, maybe with the oversight of the manager or the attorney of the association if the attorney's present. They're counting while the owners are doing their homeowner forum during the annual meeting. So it's a really efficient use of time at the annual meeting. So counting the ballots typically takes a long time. So you want to be prepared going into the annual meeting. We recommend that you count all the absentee and mail-in ballots prior to the meeting starting. And then you only count the ones at the meeting are the ones that are turned in at the meeting. And then, the homeowner forum, you're kind of tidying up all the ballot counting, coming up with the final tallies. After the homeowner forum, we typically will give the official tally to the president. There'll be an announcement as to who the new board members are. And maybe there might be some parting questions that owners may have, or maybe the homeowner forum is extending long. Maybe there's some additional questions from homeowners during this time. Be polite as a board member to the owners that are asking questions. Be respectful. The owners may not have listened in on every meeting throughout the year. So do your best to answer their questions, even if they're upset or angry. They may not have all the facts. So you want to just be really mindful of being professional and nice and responsive and businesslike as you're responding to their questions. And then basically there's a motion to adjourn and the meeting's over. One thing that comes up sometimes at the annual meeting is, do we decide who our officers are for the next year at the end of the annual meeting? It really just depends. A lot of associations have the board go right into a regular board meeting and elect who are going to be the officers for that year. So the president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. Some boards wait until the next regularly scheduled board meeting to do that. So it's really just how your board operates, what they typically have done in the past. I'd like to just close out by just making a couple comments, on voting electronically at board meetings. We're starting to see technology coming into play in annual meetings of associations. And so one of the things that we're seeing is boards that are utilizing companies to handle the entire vote electronically for your association. You want to take a look at your association's bylaws to make sure that there's nothing in there that would prohibit that. If you are conducting an election or another vote electronically, there's companies that do that. If you want the names of the companies that we are familiar with, you're welcome to email me at bmulcahy@mulcahylawfirm.com. Our experience on it is these companies, they do a great job. They assign an email to, a password to everybody in the community to vote, and owners, they get the notice to vote by email, and they type in that little password that they have, and then they vote, electronically. A couple things to think about if you're thinking about voting electronically. Number one, not all your owners may have the capability to participate in the election vote or a vote that requires, like amending CC&Rs or special assessment vote electronically. So you likely will have to offer hybrid, meaning that people can opt in to vote, by a paper ballot if they choose. So, you may not be able to do 100% unless you have knowledge that 100% of your owners actually have the capability to vote electronically. Another thing, remember that the notice of any sort of meeting of the membership or annual meeting of your association, it still does need to be mailed to the owners. So you can't by U.S. mail, so you can't send that by email. Another alternative under the law is to hand deliver, but for most associations, it's not possible to hand deliver to everybody. So everybody is following you have to provide notice of the meeting by U.S. mail, not less than 10, not more than 50 days in advance of the meeting. And so, using electronic voting is kind of the thing of the future. So if your association is interested in looking into that, please give us a call and we can put you in touch with the companies that do that. We haven't had any problems. I've probably overseen at least 50 meetings now where they've used an electronic voting company to tally the votes, and there haven't been any problems. So that's good news. And I think it's probably the wave of the future for associations. As people become, more accustomed to voting for things electronically. Okay, so I think we've kind of finished up our topics for today. Just some quick summary pointers. We had over 100 people here today, which is awesome. Thank you so much for being here today. Remember when you're, thinking about your regular board meetings, just some parting thoughts on that. If you want to have an efficient meeting, make sure that you're doing proper preparation for the meeting, that you are sending out an agenda, that you're, doing notice in compliance with Arizona law, that the agenda has the benchmark times on it for how long you're going to be discussing each topic, and that the president keeps everybody on topic as you are, going through the meeting agenda. If your meetings are running long, some tips are that the president really needs to take a hard look in the mirror and determine if they are keeping enough control over the topics that are being discussed at the meeting and really following that benchmarked agenda. Be really careful about violating the open meeting law in Arizona. The legislature has spoken, and all board meetings of the association where a quorum of the board is meeting to discuss association business need to be open board meetings complying with the open meeting law. So 48 hours notice in advance of the meeting. You have to allow owners to attend, listen, and participate before the board takes formal action on something. You might be able to expedite things at your meeting by having a homeowner forum at the beginning of the meeting where homeowners can, have 1 minute to state something that they want to say about the association or ask a question. Going into your annual meeting, don't forget to plan it out. So map out on a calendar, important benchmark dates for trying to find candidates, sending out, requests for people to run for the board, when your notice needs to go out, when your ballots, typically the ballots and the notice are sent out at the same time. All of that needs to be pre-planned. And then remember, go into your annual meeting with a plan. Consider having a PowerPoint presentation. Make it really professional, talking about, all the different aspects of running the association, and give them a 360 view of how things are going. Because that may be the only meeting that year that some of your owners attend. Thanks again for joining us today for class number 3 of our 2022 Virtual Condo and HOA Academy. I want to thank again the neighborhood service departments from the cities of Avondale, Chandler, Glendale, Goodyear, Mesa, Peoria, Phoenix, Scottsdale, Surprise, and Tempe for your teamwork and continued partnership with Mulcahy Law Firm to put together these amazing virtual classes. These classes are providing free education for hundreds of board members, managers, and owners throughout your cities. And I think you can see from the number of questions that are asked and from the participation here today that these classes are really needed and appreciated by the residents of your respective cities. Don't forget, a couple reminders. We have our next live virtual First Friday event on April Fool's Day. I wonder if we're going to be doing any April Fool's jokes on you. And we're going to be answering questions for free live starting at 9 a.m. on Zoom and Facebook Live. If you want more information on this, you can go and check our website at mulcahylawfirm.com and click on our upcoming seminars. We're also going to be doing 4 classes with the city of Chandler coming up here starting on April 13th and into May. So check out our website for information. Those classes are going to be in person. And of course, we've got our virtual class every month with the neighborhood services departments from around the valley. And class number 4 in April is going to be held on April 19th at 11 a.m. on Zoom and Facebook Live. And we're going to be discussing people problems and how to handle difficult owners and disgruntled owners and difficult situations in your associations, and all the different people problems that come up when you're managing associations, serving on your board. Maybe you're a homeowner that's having problems with your board. Maybe your board's difficult. So we're going to cover all these topics and more. And I hope you'll join us for our next class number 4 of our 2022 Virtual HOA Condo Academy on the 3rd Tuesday of April, April 19th at 11 o'clock a.m. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We appreciate you being here, and we'd be so appreciative if you enjoyed the presentation today. If you would take the time to give us a review on Google, Yelp, or Facebook, and that allows us to get the word out that these classes are beneficial and helpful to many owners and board members and managers. So again, if you wouldn't mind, we would appreciate very much a nice review of the classes on Google, Yelp, or Facebook for Mulcahy Law Firm, if you're so inclined. So thanks again for being here today. Everybody have a great month. Happy St. Patrick's Day, my absolute favorite holiday of the entire year. My dad back in Wisconsin is planning a whole week of St. Patrick's Day events. So I'm looking forward to celebrating St. Patrick's Day this week with a green beer and some corned beef and cabbage, even though I'm the only one in my family who will eat it. But anyways, hope you all have a great St. Patrick's Day, and I look forward to seeing you again next month. Take care, everybody. Be safe and have a great week.